Hi, this is Dr. Frank Chopatini with the Church of Rational Truth. Today, our Sunday lecture is going to be on obesity. Uh, Basically, we're going to talk about what is obesity, what we can do to try and combat it, why it is a good thing to try to not be obese, and probably that's the best place to start is why should we be obese? Why should we care about how much we weigh? What is our percentage of fat? How much fat do we have around our midline? And the reason is it is directly tied to mortality. A lot of people try to argue that, oh, you can be overweight and be healthy, or that there's not really good data saying that weight and risk of having a heart attack, risk of having death, risk of having cancer are not linked. That is not true. That is one of the things where I know we're very wishy-washy on this channel, or the church generally is not very wishy-washy on, what is what is true, what is not true. Some things can be argued one way or another. I would probably argue more of how much obesity is linked, or at what level is it something that you should be worried about. But I would say the vast majority of the data says that additional weight above a certain amount or above a certain metric increases the risk of mortality, and the higher up you go with obesity, the more that risk is going to be. Usually it's most doctors usually call it a J-shaped curve, or a curve that kind of like does that and goes continually up over time, where it has a nice little nadir, a nice little bottom part, which is the optimal BMI, and then it kind of keeps going up the more weight you have. And usually you see more mortality, more and more complications go up the more that BMI comes in. Generally, most physicians or most doctors are looking for like an 18 to 25 of a BMI. But if you look at some of the charts, really it's once you start getting over 25, you start seeing, that increase with it becoming, pretty much a straight line increase past that. The nadir, or that lowest point, is still kind of close to that 25. It's not that far off. I think it's like 22.5 to 25 is probably around the best, or 22.5 I think is around the best theoretically. But that's probably going to depend on what study you see, and probably a lot of other factors change that. What is the theoretical best? But it's going to be somewhere close to that. And after 25, it seems like that is when it starts going up in terms of increased mortality. With that being said, there is also the flip side of the coin. There is a BMI that is too low, where if you're under a certain BMI, it also starts increasing the mortality. Most doctors will start kind of cutting it off around the 18s, 18.5. For me, if you're looking at really exact, it still has a very close bottom around that 22.5-ish BMI range. There's going to be a lot of factors that also come into it, whether you want to use an exact hard number and how aggressive you want to be about trying to get to a perfect number of BMI. But if we talk about it, we do all have to also kind of bring up the shortcomings of using the BMI as a way of calculating this. It is generally a rough guideline of how overweight someone is. It is basically you taking their height and you're taking their weight, and you're doing the calculation based on those two factors to see relatively how overweight are you for your size, or how does your weight compare for your size. That can get thrown off quite a bit. If someone is in the extremes of size, if someone is very short, very tall, or have different reasons for the weight gain. Usually it makes the assumption that the person who has higher weight is because of more adipose tissue or more fatty tissue. If you're not having a large amount of fatty tissue make up your weight, so the example everybody gives is a bodybuilder who has a whole lot of muscle mass, that's going to kind of throw off that calculation. It's going to make you seem like you have a higher BMI. One point that I bring up with a lot of my patients when I talk to them about obesity is I had a patient who had a BMI of 66, which is a massive BMI. But the reason he had that, the dietitians would come in, massive BMI, needs to reduce calories, needs to stop eating such high calorie food. And I wanted that patient to do the exact opposite. And the reason is they weren't seeing the real big picture why that patient was listed in the chart of having a BMI of 66. That patient was an amputee. They had both legs cut off above the knees, I believe. And because of that, they had a similar mass to someone who is 5'10", 6 foot, but they were missing about 2 feet of height. If you take off that 2 feet of height and you still do the BMI calculation, it puts you at a massive BMI. Now, this person was actually nutrient deficient, was actually having some wasting. They were losing a lot of muscle mass because they weren't taking in enough calories. And so if you just followed the BMI chart and just went, oh, their BMI is huge, they're massively obese and overweight, you're going to be completely thrown off because you're not looking at the big picture with that individual person. So I do think it is a good point to just don't go flatly by the BMI number. Don't just see, oh, this is my BMI. That is the end all be all. That is what things are. It is flawed. Approach it rationally. Approach it with an understanding mind. This is what might throw it off one way or another, but it's still a rough indicator. Some people also like using just waist circumference. The good thing is it takes off that being thrown off by height. It doesn't care about your height. It just cares, how big your belly is. I think for men, it's around 35 inches. They want to look for lower than that. 40 inches is when you start getting very concerned for that. And the good thing about that people don't really know about is the waist circumference or belly fat is its own indicator of mortality. And usually that's sometimes a more accurate indicator because things like insulin resistance are very strongly tied to belly fat. Now, we don't know why specifically belly fat, but it's one where certain studies you start seeing it. Yeah, it's the belly fat that is the biggest trend, not just general obesity, that is linked with insulin resistance and therefore type 2 diabetes in adults. So that is another way that is used, but I think that's used a little bit less in the medical community because the BMI is something that's quickly auto-calculated by height and weight versus that means a nurse or medical assistant actually has to go and physically measure somebody, which is a bit more intrusive, takes a little bit more time, and you probably don't see that as much, even though it is one metric that is very usable. With that being said, people also, especially, I don't want to say everybody, but in America, we strongly underestimate or kind of overestimate how much weight is actually healthy. I bring up with my patients that my weight is borderline past the 25 BMI. And if anything, that I want to actually work on losing a few pounds, usually 5 to 10 pounds, to try and get closer to like a 22.5 BMI. And if you look at me, I am not someone you would think is overweight or obese. But if you're going by the numbers and you want to kind of be very strict about it, I would be someone who would technically qualify as slightly overweight. That will probably seem like madness to most people. Most of my patients think that, that's kind of aggressive or kind of crazy. But in America, our kind of groupthink of what is overweight and obese is really thrown off just because obesity is so prevalent in the United States. I mean, you think of someone now who you would consider overweight or morbidly obese, and you think of someone who is very, very large. And that's only because we have a whole lot of extremes. The spectrum of obesity in America is massive, and most people that you would think would be a healthy or an average weight, those are still people who are probably higher up in terms of BMI and have theoretically more body mass than would be the theoretical optimal in terms of how much they should have. So it might not seem like it, but it's very easy to get past that level of the healthy and best BMI in terms of longevity and reducing mortality. So that's what we use as our measurements. That's how we kind of define overweight. And then the higher up you get to obese, morbidly obese. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I think that's beyond the scope of this. It's just going to be a general lecture. But if we wanted to, we can get into really some fine points of, how do we divvy this up and how do we label things. But really, those are just labels. That this is, at what point do you call a BMI a different label? I don't care so much. I care more about, what is the general trend in mortality? How much does that mortality increase with that weight? So then what do we do about it? The first thing that we always talk about is diet and exercise, calories in versus calories out. I think that's a good way of understanding it. I think that it is very true in a physical manner. If you just want to talk about the physics of obesity, it is calorie in versus calorie out. And that's usually one of the first conversations I have about working on obesity, reducing weight, is seeing how many calories you're in, how many calories are out in terms of how many you burn, and then what is the net gain or net loss. I have seen that it holds very true in my patients, where if you actually calculate all the calories that they're taking in and you calculate what their metabolic rate is when they've reached a steady state in terms of weight gain or weight loss, if they eat 200 calories below that, once they burn off about I think it's 3,500 calories for 1 pound of fat, once they have that net loss, they generally lose about 1 pound of weight. The hard thing is we underestimate how many calories we take in. That is one big thing where people think that they only take in, 1,200 calories, and then you count it all up and it's 2,100 calories. There's a lot of calories that sneak in. And two, it is cumulative. Every time you go up or down in terms of how many net calories taken in or net calories taken out, it adds it all up. So if you have one cheat day or one bad day a month and you take in 2,000 extra calories, that can undo a whole lot of good in terms of calories in, calories out. Uh, there is a big mindset where people say, well, why haven't you lost weight? It's all willpower. And I think over the last 30, 40 years, we've been emphasizing a lot on, oh, it's just willpower. It's like quitting smoking. If you just want to do it enough, you can make that change. I agree that is a portion of it, or I believe that is a significant portion of why people are overweight, but I think it's overly simplistic. And I think that we're moving a little bit towards a newer model of looking at weight loss, which is kind of like your internal thermostat for weight, which is kind of like the way I like to put it. It seems the more studies we do, it seems like people more internally or endocrinologically have a set point in their brain that their body wants to get to in terms of weight, kind of a predefined, this is what my body thinks is the theoretical weight it wants to be at. And it seems like our hormones kind of push us, naturally to get back to that level. So if we're under that level, it'll kind of make us more sedentary, want us to eat more. We get over that level, we kind of are more likely to burn more until we get back to that level where our body goes, okay, this is the weight I want to be at. The problem is a lot of times that is skewed too high. It is skewed higher than it needs to be. I could go into the theory, most likely evolutionarily, it's better to be a little bit overweight because if you go through a period of not having food, yeah, you have extra to burn down. But I think most doctors are slowly moving kind of more towards that model, other than just blaming it purely on willpower and calories in, calories out. I think that is going to show people the physics of weight loss and how it works. Like the laws of physics still apply for people. So if you burn more calories than you take in, you will lose weight. But I would say socially or sociologically, that explains more why people don't lose weight or why people get to the certain weight they are at and why it is so hard for that individual to gain or lose weight beyond that. I would say those are not the only causes, especially when you see people who are very far on the scale in terms of obesity. You have to talk about the emotional aspect or the psychological aspect. I would say it is very rare for me to see a patient 40 BMI or higher, maybe even 35 BMI or higher, who does not have a psychiatric aspect to their weight gain. The vast majority that I see usually have some sort of trauma in their history, or something in their history that led them to eating as their form of pleasure or eating as their coping mechanism. They get sad, they get depressed, so they go towards eating. They were teased, they were abused as a child. There's a large number of patients that I've had who have been victim of childhood abuse who then turn to eating as their way of coping with it. Sometimes, oddly enough, it's because, one, it makes them feel better because eating gives pleasure. Anything that can give pleasure can become something that's repetitive, or it can be something that's a coping mechanism for feeling sad. But the other odd thing is some almost see it as a way of protecting themselves from being molested, where they think that if they are, large, obese, that they will not be attractive and it will be less likely that they'd be, molested or sexually abused in the future. I'm not saying everyone who is obese has that, but I've seen a couple of certain subsegments or a couple case studies that all kind of have that in common with them, where at a young age they were abused and then they, started eating to cope with the stress of that abuse or to deal with it. But then it had that additional benefit of hopefully someone would not find me attractive to do that again. And that's kind of a secondary defense mechanism or a secondary benefit from it. Right now, people are more looking towards this endocrinological way of dealing with it. And so usually if I'm going over like how we should address obesity, the first is always diet and exercise, making sure there's good amounts of cardiovascular exercise, making the diet as healthy. I think right now the trend is towards a Mediterranean diet, but I usually tell my patients whatever diet works for you to reduce the total number of calories, increase fiber intake, and that is just going to work for you. A lot of crash diets, they don't work because someone will do it for a short amount of time. and then they just won't be able to handle the limitations of that diet, and then they'll go back to their old way of eating and then gain all that weight back. So being able to lose that weight and then be able to keep it off on a specific diet is very difficult. So I usually tell people, find a diet that you do for the rest of your life. If it's going to be a change, it has to be a forever change, not one that you're just going to say, I'm not going to have cheeseburgers. And then 3 months later, you go, well, do you know what? I really want a cheeseburger because I haven't had one for so long. I think it's an unrealistic way of completely cutting things out. I usually tell patients, what is the smallest amount of this food you can handle and be able to change your life forever that way. Now, with weight loss, there's some medications that can be used. The one most recently that's starting to get in favor are GLP-1 agonists. I am, as a physician, very hopeful about these medications. These medications kind of make people feel more full and kind of decrease that mental thermostat of wanting to eat, where they just go, nope, you don't want to eat as much. You're mentally, you don't have to fulfill that anymore. Kind of like your body releasing you from that drive to want to eat more. Hopefully, fingers crossed, as these are studied more and put more into practice, that they do well. I have had it with a couple of patients that I've been trying them on these medications. Their big downside is they're very expensive. They are new medications. Most of them are just recently getting approval for weight loss. They're usually used for diabetes. And we're going to start seeing it more and more in practice. Hopefully, as we gather more information on them, they continue to be more benefit than risk. They are risks. This is not going to be me giving medical advice or telling you specifically what to do, but I would say talk to your doctor for any of these in terms of medical management. The old medicines, or the ones that are, I would say, most popular, are stimulants. Phentermine is one of the big ones. Basically, they just stimulate your body to be more awake, alert, physical, and less hungry. They kind of encompass things like caffeine, nicotine, but the medication ones are usually derivatives or pharmacologically similar to Adderall or amphetamines. Amphetamines are just a central nervous stimulant. It makes the nerves fire faster. It makes us more active. They generally are recommended for short-term weight loss. I've seen a tiny bit of a benefit for short-term weight loss. Rarely some doctors or other physicians will use them for longer-term weight loss, but generally after a while, I see most patients be able to eat through it. I think they work as a temporary appetite suppressant because of the stimulant, but then longer and longer that you're on it, it seems like it doesn't have as much of a long-lasting effect on weight loss. There are a couple of other medications that are used, some that stop you from absorbing fats or being able to break down fats to something that is absorbed, like Orlistat. They have their own downsides. But what I would say for anyone who is actually thinking of doing something above diet and exercise for weight loss, contact your doctor. They should know about your past medical history. They should be able to go over you more in depth than what I'm going over with, of what are the risks and benefits. And they'll even talk to you, should you try one of these? Do you qualify? Is your weight at such a level? That, and I would say, talk to a psychiatric professional if you also think that psychiatrically part of that is having an impact on your weight. If it is that we are severely depressed, is that we're bipolar, that we're dealing with, previous assaults, you need to also fix that psychiatric aspect. I've told that to a lot of patients who clearly have that aspect to their weight gain, is if you don't fix that psychiatric portion of it, you will gain the weight back because you haven't fixed the base problem that's causing you to gain the weight. Oh, I did not speak at all about weight loss surgeries. This is another can of worms. Usually it's at a certain level where you have such risk. All these kind of come down to risk-benefit analysis. How much risk is it of you maintaining this weight? What is the options in terms of non-pharmacological therapy, pharmacological therapy in terms of getting that weight loss? Or is the risk of actually doing a surgery to lose weight worth the benefit? This has to be individualized. Usually most patients, for insurance purposes, have to go through a year of diet and exercise or 6 months diet and exercise, psychiatric counseling. They have to try other methodologies and they have to fail them. Usually they also have to have comorbidities like diabetes, like sleep apnea that can come alongside it, that can increase your risk of mortality just because of the health impacts that it's having, other than just being overweight. But I could probably do a whole video or number of videos on weight loss surgeries. They are all risk-benefit analysis. Yes, they can have the benefit of rapid weight loss, and some of the most rapid weight loss can be done with those surgeries, but they also have the risk of surgery, so they have their own downsides. But I would say altogether, in terms of working on weight loss for an individual, talk to your doctor. Talk to your doctor of what is your healthy weight? Should you have a goal weight? What should you be doing? Should you just be doing diet and exercise? Should you be more aggressive with talking about medications or even surgeries as an option? That'll be it for this video, a little bit of a longer video. If you have questions, comments, or anything that you want us to talk about in a future video, please let us know. Once again, this is Dr. Frank with the Church of Rational Truth signing off and saying thank you for listening. Bye-bye.